Hi everyone, my name is Leila Amirsadeghi. I am the CGO at Cleanbox, and I'm honored to be moderating today's panel on pandemic innovation, location-based entertainment in a new world. Couldn't be more excited to welcome fellow panelists representing some of the world's most creative companies, including Meow, Altspace, Burning Man, and Lost Horizon. We'll be exploring real world, virtual world, and cross-world events and experiences, and how the pandemic is impacting both out-of-home and in-home entertainment. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce each of our panelists and give them a few minutes to talk about themselves and what they're up to. Kelly.
Hi everyone. It's really great to be here. I am the program owner of Altspace VR. We are one of the earliest social VR companies to kind of hit the market, and we've learned a lot since then. But if you haven't experienced social VR, it basically means you put on a headset and you can see your hands and you can see other people read their body language. And we're a place where a lot of people come together and they hang out in virtual events. So our bread and butter is events. We do everything from comedy shows to dance parties to meetups, and trying to give people a really good purpose for putting on a headset and feeling that like they're there with other people. So that's my passion.
Thanks, Katie. Hey, Ollie, did you want to take?
Absolutely, yeah. Hi, I'm Ollie Rankin. I do a lot of different things in VR. My main focuses are interactive storytelling, trying to save the world by convincing people to care about the climate crisis. And today I'm here representing Lost Horizon and VR Jam, two companies that I'm part of. They're involved in putting on virtual events, bringing people together in virtual reality spaces and recreating the sort of the magic of festival experiences in VR.
Awesome, welcome, Ollie. Vince.
Yeah, I'm Vince Kadlubek. I'm founder and director of Meow, which is an experiential company doing location-based, immersive, interactive art. We have an experience in Santa Fe called House of Eternal Return, which opened in 2016, and we're going to be opening exhibits in Las Vegas and in Denver and in other cities around the country, around the world. My interests mostly are centered around creating alternative realities, new social constructs within which people can operate under new social contracts. That's kind of like where the heart and soul is it for me, and just wanting to bring a more creative, more imaginative world into people's being.
Love that. I think it leads beautifully into Kim's introduction.
Hi, thank you, Leila. Thank you for organizing this, and so happy to get the chance to be with the rest of the panelists. I'm the Director of Creative Initiatives for Burning Man, and I would say that Burning Man is very much about co-creation, about permission, about community and connection, and ultimately that becomes about culture. And when I was hired 5 years ago, a lot of the conversation was about scale. How does Burning Man scale beyond the desert in Nevada, where we have Black Rock City and 80,000 people each year, as we saw global events happening in 90 other locations worldwide? We were asking ourselves about the culture, the movement, and the impact of the ideas of Burning Man beyond the actual physical location. And so this place of where do ideas scale, how do you recontextualize culture in ways that are still authentic for the culture, was already on deck for Burning Man. And now most recently, I had the opportunity to lead the work around 10 technology platforms that all created virtual experiences for this year's Burning Man, not in the desert.
Great, thanks, Kim. I think I'm going to stay with you for a moment. And you talked a little bit about the result of how the you know, the pandemic has affected Burning Man, for example, in your businesses. So I'd love to talk to each of you, to hear from each of you around how has the pandemic affected your business, as it stood 6+ months ago. What changed, if anything, and what new opportunities have emerged?
You know, it's a rich conversation with almost not in, you know, let's sit down for a few days kind of time would make sense. The thing that stays the same about Burning Man is it's a very human experience. It's a very human community that cares very much about participating. And so whether or not there was a pandemic, that energy of moving in the direction of making a contribution, doing so co-creatively in community, that was immediate. And you saw Burners Without Borders beginning to collect PPE for health workers, and that sort of impulse and urge to be human and to connect and to contribute. At the same time, people were looking at what does it mean to not go to the desert, and our CEO said, let's be virtual, and we all said we don't exactly know how to do that. And then the thing that is natural inside of Burning Man is that it is a learning by doing culture. It's not held back by what is not known. It's stimulated by the opportunity to engage and co-create, and failure is acceptable at Burning Man. Anybody who's been out to the desert and tried to build something knows that you're going to be faced with challenges, and those challenges are overcome together. So for us, in the big picture, in terms of our business model, we're still trying to absorb the blow of the change to our revenue profile and to reimagine how we structure and move forward and ask the community for support around that. And in the experiential and the community connection, then we moved through and into this sort of grand experiment in social space online. And I think, you know, Katie mentioned that her passion is about how that's enabled with the technology at Altspace. And the thing that's really emerging for me with the 10 different platforms that came forward, creatives in our community that wanted to offer a virtual Burning Man experience, they all had a different interpretation of what that might look like. And I felt like I got to be sort of front row to what is innovation around interactivity in digital space look like. And different people prioritize different things. And later we can talk maybe a bit about the technology. But the important thing, I think, is that the social connection, that we're moving into the social mechanics where virtual space is public space. And so some of the same goals of a location-based experience or the built environment, where I've done a lot of site-specific work and public art work with Burning Man and before I was with Burning Man, some of the same tenets apply. You know, it's a social construction. How will we be in it together? How do we not overly commercialize it? How do we have immediate experiences? How do we participate? How do we own it together and not be subject to it? These kinds of questions are just as material in virtual space as they are in real life, as it were.
Absolutely agree with that. That's why this time, as destructive and scary as it might be, is also really exciting in the innovation that is being born from it. Vince, love to have you jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what changed for Meow Wolf during this whole period of time, I mean, of course, the revenue hit for all of us in the events industries, you know, has just been really difficult to grapple with. But, you know, like the biggest thing for me is that like so many people now have seamlessly adopted the usage of, you know, Zoom and online video meetings. And I think that like that's probably the biggest shift for us as a company, both internally, of course, with like how we meet, how we communicate, how we work, but I think also moving forward, just how easy it's going to be for audiences to step into virtual spaces, to step into virtual events, to step into you know, to use their camera on their laptop. Like that to me is like probably the most significant, you know, significant component. I'd also say that like the retail, like we're location based, and so we think about developments a lot. We think about retail and square footages and malls and shopping centers, and the retail apocalypse that everybody thought was going to happen, that was in the process of happening. Everybody thought it would sort of reach its its kind of climax within the next 10 years, is now upon us today. So that's the other thing that the pandemic has done, is it's accelerated a paradigm shift that was already in process, but really just sort of like stuck a fork in it. I mean, so now what you're going to end up having when this lifts, when the pandemic lifts, is you're going to have millions and millions and millions and millions of square footage of built environment, of buildings, of built space, of delineated space that has zero solutions for it, where it's not going to be a retail shop. It's not going to be the big box store. It's going to be looking for its new concept. And most of the people who have this square footage, most of the developers that have the square footage, also have pretty deep pockets, and they have the property already built. So they're asking themselves, how do I invest in something that can now fill this empty space? And so to me, like, really, we should be thinking not about the pandemic, but what's after the pandemic, and trying to get ahead of the curve, skate to where the puck is going, and start the process of developing new slate of experiential solutions for all of the dead space that the pandemic has created. So, that's also something where me personally, but then also Meow Wolf is, considering.
Awesome. Thanks. Ollie.
Yeah, so when I joined VR Jam 3 years ago, we were working mostly on hybrid events. So we were taking real life events, we were putting motion capture suits on DJs at nightclubs and allowing people to tune into the event remotely via VR. And that our main motivation for doing that was to increase accessibility and inclusivity at these kinds of events, to allow people who weren't able to physically get to a venue, or who didn't want to have a carbon footprint for getting to an event. So we've sort of been pursuing these inclusivity and climate based goals for virtualizing events, and the COVID pandemic has kind of, it's accelerated that shift as well. It's as Vince was saying, it's made it a lot more natural for people to attend things virtually. There's all of these sort of festivals and conferences happening in VR, and the carbon footprint of our sort of professions has all been massively reduced, which is a great thing, and the accessibility of all of these events has been massively increased. And so when I look to beyond COVID, and I'm sure we'll come back to that later, when I look to beyond COVID, I think I want to make sure that those changes stay. But when COVID hit, we were in the process of trying to line up more of these sort of hybrid events, and then it became obvious that fully virtual events were going to be the way of the future. And so for our business, it's been a bit of a boon, to be honest, because it has just accelerated the uptake of these kind of events.
Do you mind if I jump in and say something? I'll make it brief because I know Katie hasn't had a chance to talk yet. I think also, though, like one of the platforms that developed was Co-Reality Collective with Sparkleverse, and a lot of people loved them because the technology was simple, but the thinking along the lines of what you were talking about before, Ollie, with the motion capture DJ sort of played out. So they did things like had a hot tub party where people joined from their bathtubs, and this guy was like, shaving in fishnet stockings, and they, created an option to get into the experience where you could have a ride with other friends, and you clicked it, and your four little heads were like in a virtual car, and you're stuck there for half an hour before you could actually enter the experience, getting to know these strangers. And so I still think there's a space for this kind of crossover of playful, what you can do physically as a part of what you do virtually. So I just wanted to toss that in there.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in?
Please.
So I think I get really excited when I'm on panels like this, because I think everybody is echoing kind of the things that I have kind of quietly been working on and hoping that other people see the value of. But now, because of COVID, so many people are talking about it, which I think just makes the potential for this space to have a lot of creative energy dropped into it. And Kim, to just even say, like, us, like Altspace was privileged to be one of the recognized multiverses within Burning Man this past like couple weeks. And that was a dream for me, because a lot of the things that I tried to do with Altspace as a leader of that team was to harness the energy from the live events, the real experiences that I feel like really pushed the boundaries on like, how do we relate to each other? How do we relate to performers and artists? Artists relate to audiences. And one of the biggest ones is Burning Man for me. I've been 5 years, and every single time I go, I reimagine different ways that we connect. Another one is Camp Grounded, which is this summer camp for adults held in San Francisco, where of course it would happen in the Redwoods, where you all come together, you're assigned to camps. I was a bobcat and a deer for 1 year, and you do things like archery and yoga and things in the woods, and you act like a kid. So those different things, I think, gives us the opportunity to go, okay, we're stuck inside, but how do we use our real experiences and the things we miss and harness that, tied to the potential for technology, instead of us, like, I really hope we get out of the, we're being limited, and everybody on this call, I think, is already past that, to go, okay, oh, we're stuck with a Zoom call. It's like, you're not stuck. And I think what Sparkleverse did, what Meow always does, is go, okay, we have these limitations, but now how do we create delight out of that? So even in, for BRCVR, I had so many experiences from that. But one of my favorite was, I met a man who had crashed his unicycle the week before, and he had a broken arm, broken leg, and he wouldn't have been able to go to Burning Man anyways, but that was like his, he went every year. He was a fire spinner. So his father bought him a VR headset. He put it on. I met him about 5 minutes after he got into BRCVR. And I was like, do you want to come to this space where somebody put fire sticks? He was like, what? So I took him in, and he started playing around with it. And then he was doing shows for other people. And then the next experience, I went to a post office where somebody was sending live cards from a post office in virtual reality to the real world. And so I think those experiences for me in my own platform, but also all the experiences that you've heard on this panel, I hope excites people to go, we are separate and we're alone, but let's use that energy of wanting to connect. And the last point too, Kim, I think you brought up what the different ways that people are kind of, with BRCVR specifically, we wanted to harness the connection between people. Like that was our focus. You were talking about different focuses. And the thing that I think Altspace really tries to do is give you a reason for being in the same place, which for us is events, because what's the best way to get adults interacting in the real world? It's not like the chaos of possibility. It's, here's a reason for you to put on a headset and say hi to a stranger. So for us, it's coming together for a common interest, whether it's BRCVR or an LGBT meetup or VR church or the numerous ways that people have created content in Altspace. It's how do you use that to create connections and friendships. And so as we think about concerts, as we think about the future of any entertainment medium, what are the ways that we're not going to go, how do we remake the thing that we miss? But how do we add to it so there's even more potential for accessibility, for climate change improvement, for, I don't know, I feel like I've been on this train for the last 5 years, and now there's so many other people getting on board that I feel a lot of excitement for the potential, what happens next.
I agree with that. I think, you know, it's important to use the technology as tools to create these various connections rather than be driven by the tech, which we're seeing here. And one of the things, you know, I'm hearing over and over again is the social connection, its accessibility. The thing with location-based, and at least the popularity of seeing in the last 5 years rise up from just traditional out-of-home to more interactive participatory experiences is that people come together. They want to be together with others. They want to be able to create or collaborate or connect. And then ultimately it's around community. And for a long time there, I thought that that needed to be in person with eye contact, you know, until very recently, where we're seeing it, whether it's VR, or I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the other platforms, and not only how they've been used to create these experiences of connection in the pandemic world and in the virtual space, but also in the real world. Maybe Vince, we can talk a little bit about Meow Wolf's use of XR or AR and VR, or the ideas that are forming there.
Yeah, so like I said when I first introduced myself, like I'm really mostly interested in alternative realities, and the reason being that, like, we need a new construct, we need new social contracts, we need a new system of value in order to subvert what is currently the status quo. And so like that alternative reality is going to be like, for us, like we like to we build large scale physical things, and we want people to be able to enter into an alternative reality by entering into our exhibitions. But we can take that even farther if we start to connect our physical locations with spatial programming, with spatial computing, that then can extend beyond the walls of the exhibitions themselves, and can start to become an overlay onto all of the acreage and square footages across the globe. So like that, to me, the promise of AR and really headset driven AR is that we can opt into realities as we so choose, and those realities can become can circumvent or can subvert the existing platform with which we live in, and the current systems of value and social norms, social contracts. So and like, because we can't take over every piece of physical space, like we just obviously don't have the manpower to do that. Creatives can't do that, but with headset AR or AR VR pass through, blah blah blah, we actually can take over the entire world with our own reality, and so that's what's exciting about it to me. But you need physical anchor points to really make that happen. You need to be able to have interactions between the AR overlay and the physical anchor in order for that reality to have integrity, if that makes sense, in order for the reality to be real. So when I say alternative reality, it's like, I'm not talking about storytelling per se. I'm not talking about entertainment or escapism. I'm like literally talking about a new way to live. And that will be found through entertainment and art and creativity and, culture and, but it's taking Burning Man out of the desert and trying our best to actually connect it around the world.
Yeah, and I think the Shangri-La zone at Glastonbury, the big festival in the UK, has a very similar sort of mentality to Burning Man, and also to what Vince is talking about with Meow Wolf. As rather than escapism, let's sort of build a prototype alternate reality that is a better way of managing the interactions between human beings, and sort of building community based around mutual respect and interdependence and communal responsibility, collective responsibility, rather than sort of individualism and greed that are the driving forces of the physical reality paradigm that we're all trying to escape.
I love that. I think we're talking about transformation here ultimately at the end of the day. Burning Man being one of the largest and longest transformational events out there, I, personally believe, I think we all do here, where AR VR also has that ability to transform to impact in real time. Really exciting. I definitely think this is the way to inspire long term. Kim, I'd love to hear a little bit from you. I mean, we've been talking about transformational notions and Burning Man's culture over the years. It's been very much about bringing that to the forefront. How did you see that play out, and in however you define it, sort of with the multiverse and the various incarnations of?
Yeah, it's interesting to sit and to listen and to know that there is some kind of balance between embodied and experience. And the headset experience does allow for a certain amount of embodiment, or creative approaches such as I mentioned with Sparkleverse also brings it back to the body in your own home and then into how you connect. And so I think I find myself feeling like there's both opportunity and caution in how we think about these things. And in terms of Burning Man and the different platforms that we had, there were 10 altogether, and each of them expressed a different, almost like priority, I would say, in terms of what they developed. So Infinite Playa used the Unreal Engine, and so they were able to get to a sort of level of photorealism and visual experience that was very high level, and their avatars were very customized, and then a truly interesting way to journey around the playa with them. And then you look at Build-A-Burn, which was on the Topia platform, and it's based on illustrations and sketches, and really proximity is almost the biggest, sort of unit of play, if you will, so that your little avatar is just a tiny little figure that's in a color. And as you approach a different illustration or sketch or experience inside of that world, others who are also approaching that in virtual terms fade in and out of audio and video resolution. So when they were first describing their ideas to me, they were doing so as a kind of, if you go to a Zoom room, you're all stuck in the same room. But if you go to a party, you might like hang out on the front porch for a while, then you go through the living room, then you go into the kitchen and you get something to drink, then you go see who's hanging out in the backyard. So their actual, point of development was around this ability to mingle and to move in and out of proximity to people and have encounters. So everyone was experimenting with where they placed the social benefit, if you will, of the experience and how you might connect and what's meaningful. And they all express those things differently, which I found to be super fascinating. And who would have thought that 10 different platforms could each have their own individual idea of what it meant to create a virtual Burning Man?
I love that. Well, so that takes us to, I'm curious to hear, I mean, we both, Katie and Ollie, you've mentioned some of the pluses to social VR and this social virtual world. What would you say from either of the recent big experiences, Lost Horizon or VRCVR, your own words, what would you say were some of the biggest surprises, something that you didn't almost anticipate seeing happen?
For me, the biggest surprise, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, Leila, was that was just how compelling the experience was for non-VR users, because we built this in the Sansar platform, knowing that the visual fidelity of the platform and the sort of the built-in social tools were going to make it an absolutely amazing experience for somebody in VR, and it was actually going to feel like they were, at some real crazy cyberpunk future festival. What we didn't really factor in, and even though one of the reasons that we chose Sansar was because it doesn't limit attendance to just VR attendees, but people can tune in on a PC desktop and we managed to get a smartphone app also running in time for the event, so that people on any smartphone could also tune in. But what was just absolutely amazing was that somebody on their PC desktop spending a few minutes customizing their avatar and a couple of minutes downloading some dance moves that they could then have their avatar do, that tiny amount of effort and their own sort of personality that they imbued on that avatar meant that they were recognizable, and that you could actually feel like you were on a dance floor with people from around the world who you recognized and knew. I think that was just absolutely mind-blowing, and it just gave me so much hope for the future of these kind of events.
Katie.
Yeah, there were so many things. And I think the biggest one for me was we've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years with Altspace. And I've heard so many stories about how this has impacted people that use the platform, whether it's from an accessibility standpoint or finding their community. One of my favorites is still our LGBT meetup, is one of our longest running events. And when I first hosted one, probably 4 years ago, I was talking to a couple hundred people in Altspace, and I was asking them about their different experiences being gay around the world. And you heard everything. You heard from a couple in South Africa that was fighting for gay rights, or a man in Turkey that was scared or worried and trying to find his place in the world. And what we heard, though, after doing those more often, that because we offered a place for people to meet despite their geography, despite what I take for granted living in a major city, that gave a community and culture that isn't as accessible. And there was one woman that I met a couple of years later that said she was able to come out to her family in a pretty rural place in the US because she felt like she found her community in VR. So I've been hearing this for years, but the surprise since COVID was more me experiencing it in a way that I don't think was possible unless the place where I went was flooded with my own culture. And so having VR and putting on my headset, I've never had the need to go back and put on my headset every night for 5 days straight. I crawled into my bed unapologetically at 4 a.m. on Friday night of VR week, and it felt like I had been through the dust. And it was because everybody I met had prescribed to a culture that I really gravitate towards. I went up to somebody and started talking about God and spirituality within 5 minutes, like something that happened all the time at a place I used to travel very far to go to. And I'm not saying that we're emulating or we're replicating experiences, but I think for me, really understanding that ability to go into a space by just putting on a headset, which again is like still not attainable enough. Like these things are expensive. They're like, we have a lot of work to do to make it more accessible. Like Ollie was saying, that like we need to make sure that people don't need a VR headset to experience this. Altspace is available on Mac and PC, and we released Mac just a couple weeks ago, primarily because we wanted it to be more accessible too. And so I think that there's a lot that I'm learning about just being in there, experiencing this with people. But the main thing was, like my energy gauge, and I'm an extroverted introvert, my energy gauge was so much higher when I took off that headset that I was like, okay, like I didn't physically get to hug somebody, but man, those virtual hugs seem to do something. So what can we do to really like improve upon that, if this could potentially be a way that we connect from here on out?
I think you're doing a beautiful job, Katie, of expressing that. And that was very much what we were hearing from people. Our CEO went into VR and ran into the black hole, which is like the staff bar. And she just got up her headset and started crying, like she's like, I didn't realize it could be this vivid. The other piece is that it does allow for the global participation. Technology limitations aside, people could come in from all over the world, and we're still doing all the counting, but we had a very high percentage of people who had never been to Burning Man who were coming in and being like, wait, you guys are so nice, and asking questions. So in terms of this idea of how do you scale culture, like it gives you know, you can't go more than 80,000 people in the Black Rock Desert. You can go a lot more virtually. So that was really interesting. And then also people in different geographies who wanted to spend time together could find each other. So, you know, people on staff were reporting taking their parents into the worlds and, you know, into BRCVR. A woman that I met had a sister who's not well with cancer, and they don't live in the same city, and Burning Man was on their bucket list. And so instead they, you know, made a plan to go to BRCVR together, you know, and even though they were literally apart. And so there are factors for connecting that I think were delightful to us and not necessarily a foregone conclusion. And we owe a lot of gratitude to the folks that did this, because Burning Man facilitated, but in the end, it was the gifts of the community and the technology creators that made it possible.
No, absolutely. And just a plug for parents in VR too. Like my dad, I always wanted to get him to Burning Man. And now I feel like we actually got that experience because I could not get him out of the headset. I'd be like, okay, like I'm done for the night. He's like, okay, I'm gonna wander around a little bit longer and go to the roller disco. I was like, bye, Dad. Sorry, go ahead.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years as sort of platform boundaries become the new geographical boundaries. And just to see how we sort of, you know, cross over or get siloed. And hopefully it doesn't lead to more sort of people living in bubbles, but actually encourages people to get out of their bubbles and cross over and meet people that they wouldn't have otherwise met.
Yeah, that brings up a good a question for me is, you know, we talk about accessibility and we talk about availability across all these screens or platforms potentially in the digital space. But I mean, it's not, you can't necessarily recreate a concert experience on the phone as you might inside of VR or as you might in the real thing. And so I would love to just talk a little bit about that. And I mean, I'd love to pick your brain, Vince, as we think about, and everyone here, I mean, so Burning Man, Meow Wolf, even Lost Horizon, I mean, Altspace, they're creative platforms at the end of the day. It's a way for people to get content out. It's a way for people to get experiences out. I'm curious to hear how you see technology or spatial really playing or taking that one step further. I mean, are we there yet today? Can creators just create and then, you know, plug out into an experience? Where do you see that going, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, user tools, creator tools is going to be a really important aspect to this. You know, I think that like what Sony did with Dreams is pretty remarkable, and you know the direction that that Epic is going with Unreal and that Unity's going. I think, you know, really like creator tools within game engine is going to be critical. We're going to want for participants to be the creators to co-create within the world. We don't want to just have people stepping into other people's creations. We want everybody to co-create together. So you know, those like user-friendly creator tools within AR VR is going to be really important. You know, but also like we're quite it's become a bit of a habit for us to think about technology and the usage of technology in a purely digital form, like to consider VR, I guess like because the internet happens like on the screen and so much of our lives happens in the internet these days, we think about the internet and the real world as kind of two separate worlds. And now we're carrying that over into VR, where like there's the real world, there's the physical world, and then there's the VR world. And what I think is really going to be the more empowering evolution here is when the two become conjoined, when they end up talking to each other. I think as long as it's purely virtual, it will always end up being entertainment of sorts. Not entertainment, but it'll end up being fictitious, and it's going to be when it anchors to physical space that really I think empowers the general population, you know, into participating, into co-creating with each other. It's always gonna, I feel like there's gonna be this sort of like escapism or limitation as long as we kind of think about it in just digital form. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm like a big believer in, I think the game-changing peripheral is gonna be the Apple headset peripheral that the masses end up adopting, and that's going to be an overlay, that's going to be physically anchored, and that's going to open up AR VR because it becomes functional in our everyday lives, you know. And so that's like a lot of incredible work is being done today, people in this room and thousands others, to try to figure out like what are the baseline tools, what are the baseline rules of engagement within a spatial virtual world. But I think it's all in preparation for what is ultimately just going to become like, you know, just the life we live, just like the everyday life we live. I don't know if any of that made sense. I'm just thinking about like how we can all get like, you know, how we're going to end up kind of taking this from, you know, hobby but it really empowering like the general population with this technology, you know.
Something to jump in there, because I think I'm really curious too about the blending of realities. And obviously, like Altspace is part of the Microsoft Mixed Reality Group, which is responsible for HoloLens. So we're around a lot of people that are thinking through, okay, what are we going to do with AR to, like you said, just give people more access to different experiences. We did an experiment a couple weeks ago where we put a DJ in a HoloLens, and so that they could still see all their equipment, and they were able to see a overlay of Altspace in front of them. So they were able to see people dancing to their music. And I think that has always been, at least in discussions that I've had, it's always been kind of a first step to go, okay, how can we kind of merge those things together? So in VR, you really did feel like you were in a space dancing and there were people around you making eye contact. And then on stage, you saw a holographic representation of the talent's in AR, so they're able to see their space, but they're able to see the crowd too. I think that we're going to see more experiments like that. And I'm excited to see how that, again, for us, like our focus is bringing people together. So what we were curious about was hearing from that DJ, what was that like for you? And they expressed that it was just so cool to wave to somebody in the crowd and they wave back. And we're in the midst of COVID, there are no crowds, there's no audiences. So I think that there's some magic there, especially while we're in isolation, so that we can improve on kind of that experience. So one, everybody has accessibility to these concerts, to people they care about, but also that the performer also has that ability to connect authentically with their fans.
Yeah, I think, you know, in thinking about the platforms, we can think about platforms as in like, you know, different headsets, or, you know, is it going to be PCs, is it going to be Mac, is it iPhone, is it Oculus, is it Vive, whatever. But really, I think the platforms that we should be thinking about designing, integrating and designing together is the platform of physical reality, the platform of virtual reality, and then the platform of in between, the augmented reality, and really thinking about designing so that all of those platforms are congruent and are connected, and really leading with that, and that, you know, that making it a lot more accessible for the mass amount of people in the world.
Awesome. That wasn't me saying that we are about to wrap up, but our time is sort of coming to an end. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really grateful that you all made the time today to join us. So thank you so much. We have about a minute. Any burning, you know, last minute thing that you really want to put out there before we've closed this session?
I just want to echo what Vince said earlier about creator tools are super important. And then Katie sort of built on that in terms of creating haptics and familiarity that make it sort of come to life for people. And then followed by how we look at the continuum of different realities. And I think the role that AR has to play in the future is going to change geometrically, exponentially, based on what we're learning while we all are purely virtual, because in the end, I think that mashup between AR and how we connect with others and how we also are embodied has a lot of possibility for the future.
Yeah,
and I would
Go
just
ahead.
jump in and say that it's very important that that virtual reality, augmented reality, that these sort of spatial computing platforms don't follow the same sort of trajectory that social media did, coming on the scene as something with a great deal of promise and potential for positive social impact, and turning into what we all know that it's turned into now.
+1 or 2 to 3 to 1,000.
I mean, I think technology is a double-edged sword no matter what, and it's our responsibility to make sure it's used right in this instance. And absolutely, Kim, you're speaking to the, you're preaching to the converted here, having done a mixed reality experience with the HoloLens and 40 people in a physical space that had all sorts of other connections. I do agree. Having, like Vince said, having your foot grounded in reality, but there being some magical components or other realities on top of that does have a more prolonged, I think, and this is just based on a few years,
So
not on scientific fact.
Is that next year's panel?
Yeah, we'll be back.
Move into the role of AI and crossing geographic boundaries through AR and all that good stuff.
Oh my God, we'll be teleporting around. I mean, I'm going to miss the flying and the teleportation, of large scale festivals and events. I mean, that was great to be able to just get quickly to somewhere or find your friends. So looking forward to bringing those together. Again, thank you so much. I could keep going on for hours, but I don't think we have that. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Have a good one.